Hi, I'm Brad Greenham with Farriery Tuition, and today we're going to be making the Aluminium Heart Bar. So our first step is to measure the foot to see what length of material we need. So we're going to measure the width, which is 6 inches. It's important to measure where you want the steel to go, not just the foot. And then our length, we've got another 6 inches because we're measuring back past the heel because we want to get some heel cover on it. Allow the 2 inches for our toe bend, takes us to 14. And now I'm going to measure down the frog. And you can see if I measure from where the steel, where I want it at the heel, down to where I want it at the apex of the frog, about 10 mil back, it leaves me with 3 inches. So I'm going to add that to our measurement. But it's important to measure the heels as well, so you know how far you want that bar shoe to wrap in, whether you've got a tight heel and you want to turn it on more, or you want a wide bar shoe if you've got a big flat foot. So our first measurement on this is 18 inches, so that's my overall length. You would notice that the frog plate measured 3 and 3. Well, I've taken an inch off of each end, so I've got 2 and 2, which I'm just marking up now, 2 inches on each end, and I mark also right in the middle of what I've allowed. So that last inch, I'm going to stretch that and double the length of it when we make the frog plate. So that will then take us back to our 3 inches. I take quite a bit of time measuring up and marking up, and you'll see that I do it on the back of the shoe as well. And then I mark it all up with the center dot. That's so I can see the bar shoe and the frog plates as I'm turning them and making them from each and every angle. And they do normally get squashed, the little center dots, so it's important to have quite a few. And keep an eye on where everything's going, and you always find that if you don't mark both sides, then the one side you wanted marked is the side that isn't marked. So I measure it all up, cut off at 18 inches, and then that should leave me with an 18-inch piece of material with 2 inches for my frog plate, and I divide that in half, so I've got an inch and an inch. Mark it up with the center dot. And I do that top and bottom, both sides. And one there, right for the center of the bar shoe. And again, this is on the back side. Same process. So once we're ready, I get it in the forge and get it up to temperature. So I like to use these little wooden tongue depressors, and when they run up along the aluminium, they should leave a nice black transfer. And when the black transfer is on there, it's ready to work. As you can see, this one, there is no transfer, so this is too cold. So we'll put it back in, get it up to temperature, and then we'll get a nice black transfer on there ready to work. Back out of the fire, we'll see what it's like this time. And you can see that leaves a nice black transfer, and the transfer stays on. So that is perfect temperature for working, so that's ready to work. Let's put it back in the fire, get it a little bit hotter, push it past that temperature, and you can see when it's too hot, when not to work it. So we're back out the fire, let's see what this is like. So you can see the black transfer goes on, and see how it disappears? That is too hot to work. Don't hit that, it will shatter and splinter. But if we go again, you can see it will actually cool down and normalize to a temperature where the black will stay on, and that is okay to work. Same piece of aluminium, and it's just cooled down to the correct temperature of working. And anything past that, then it's melted, and it can't do anything about that. For my toe bend, I like to turn the shoe to get both sides of that toe equally hot. Otherwise, with the transfer of heat from the forge, you'll have one side hotter than the other, and then the toe bend won't be central. Get the stick on it just to make sure there's a transfer and it's at the correct temperature. I use a fine wire brush when I'm using aluminium. I find the big butcher's block scrapes it up too much. And I put my toe bend in. You can bump this if you wanted to, but I've not allowed for a bump in my measurement. I spend quite a bit of time on the toe bend. I like to get it nice and even. There's not much more I can do with that heat, other than bump if I want to bump. Once I've got that toe bend where I want it, I'll now put it back in the fire and I'll get the end hot where we've got the 2 dots. And then we start concentrating on making our arrowhead. So we're back in the fire now. Keep testing that temperature. The heat will transfer really quickly now it's got hot. Now we're going to start tapering down that arrowhead, but you've got to come in real steep because that arrowhead will get long really quickly. You don't want to forge that arrowhead back past that first dot, so bring it in roughly about a 45-degree angle and don't come back past that first dot. Bottom of the material there is flat on the anvil, on the face of the anvil, and just taper that down. It's important to keep that nice and flat. Keep that left hand down, otherwise you end up with a rounded point. Once you've got that, then you can start tapering all the way down that arrowhead and pulling out the material on that first dot you've put in. But again, it's important now to keep it nice and square and nice and straight all the way down, just keeping the edges worked back in. Once I've got to this stage, I'll now drop the round side of my hammer into the back of that arrowhead just behind that first dot there, and then I'll just work it back down the branch a little bit just to thin up what's going to be the heel. I also like to put it in at the bick there and just pull it back and just work down the branch a bit, and it also just creases in the back nice and round where you've been dropping the round side of your hammer in, just to give it a nice bit of definition. I now like to measure up and make sure I've doubled the length. So from tip to the top of that arrowhead, 2 inches. Now just give it a good file up. It's important to keep the aluminium clean for when you're brazing in the forge. So I just tidy up the arrowhead and just get it all scratched up the surface clean. Now we're going back in for the other arrowhead, and the process will be exactly the same. But it's a little bit hot. Now it should be okay. Black transfer has stayed on. So again, coming down to that first point at a nice angle, but don't come back past that point. Keep the material and then back down again, and then again keep the material contained. And then once you've got everything contained and straight, you can then pull out and start working down through that taper and pulling out on that first dot to form that arrowhead. And the process, like I say, is exactly the same as the first arrowhead. So we now just pull out that dot and taper right down through. It will bulge out, so we do need to keep working it back in. And then the last thing with this arrowhead is to then drop that round side into the back of that arrowhead. Like that, and then start working down through the branch, because that second dot is going to be where the point of your heel is, so this is going to be your branch, and that'll make it a little bit easier when you turn it in a minute. It's a bit thinner there, and like I say, like to just hook it into that bick just to define it all and just tidy it all up. Now I like to measure both arrowheads to make sure they are the same. So we started off with 2 inches and we marked them in the middle, so we had 1 inch and 1 inch, and we're going to grow that inch on each end to make 2 inches. So we're going to double that length, and then 1 inch and a 2 inch arrowhead will give us our 3 inches for our frog plate. It's important to call out that arrowhead back just past that first dot. Put the second dot on top of the bick and then push that arrowhead with the round side of your hammer around that bick. By this way, it will keep that arrowhead as protected as possible. It's when I get it to a certain stage, about this sort of stage, I now like to just put it up on its end and hook it back. But you've got to be really careful not to hit the point, or you will end up rounding your point. So you just hit it on the back. You will need to pull back out the chamfered edge, as you will knock it into itself. Put it up on its end, lift up my left hand and work down through that heel just to tighten everything up in that corner and just give it that some definition. But when you're doing this, it's important to lift that left hand and get the back of that arrowhead. Don't get the point, or you'll just round that point. You end up with a U-shaped arrowhead. Again, on the second one, same thing, same process. Call out the arrowhead, second point on top of the bick, and then just push it around with the round side of your hammer until you get it to the stage where you can start hooking it back. But again, reiterating, do not hit that point. I think on this one I actually do hit that point a little bit there. So I've then got to actually just start working that back out. That wasn't too hard to fix, it was only one missed blow, but some of them you can end up going right over and they can end up becoming very U-shaped, and it's a bit of a nightmare to get them back out. But there, straight on the back of that arrowhead, you start just hooking it back to itself. And just square them up. This is the last chance really you're going to be able to get into those arrowheads. And then obviously to pull out that chamfered edge again, because you're going to just be squashing it every time when you hit it. Now again, it's just going to check all the measurements because I've done a bit of work to them. I want to make sure they're the same, so they should measure 2 inches. At that point I can file them back if I need to. So at this stage, I'm trying to get the whole shoe hot. I like to try and bring them both on together. I find otherwise I bring one on a little bit too much and one not enough, and it's in and out the fire too much. But if I've got them both hot together, then I can just start bringing them round. At this point I try and ignore that they've got a frog plate on them. Try and ignore the arrowheads and just try and concentrate on the shape of the shoe. I spring them apart so they're not in the way when they meet up. And they want to meet chamfered edge on chamfered edge. But just keep working them around each side, bit on each side, until they just meet up and marry up. Now I'm just measuring that heel, just like we spoke about earlier, about that, how wide that foot was, whether I want a wide heart bar or a narrow heart bar. So just gonna have to close this up a bit, and this is the best time to do it before I commit myself. Well, I've got them sprung open as well, so the shoe's quite twisted, so I can get into both of them. And again, when you're doing that, just be careful you're doing it on the back of that arrowhead and not on the point. Now I'm just going to spring these open a bit just so they can just meet up. Sometimes I'll put my hand over the arrowheads and the frog plate, and just so I can just see the shoe, because that frog plate will draw your eye. And there, just spring it a little bit. Those heels, I can't change those heels, so they're very important to get them lined up. What I mean by that, if one is half a centimetre or a centimetre higher than the other heel, once it's all welded and brought together, I can't change that. So it's very important to try and get that shoe where you want it, and to try and get those heels lined up. I'm just going to have a look at the foot now, just to see if there's any more adjustments I want to make. But I'm fairly happy with that. It should just be a little bit penny on a penny now, because then by the time I fuller it, it'll just push it open. And also when I weld that frog plate and set it then down until the material is back to 10mm, it will just push everything open a little bit. So give it a real good clean up, because like we said, aluminium brazing, it does not like anything dirty, but we've already filed up those chamfered edges, so they should still hopefully be nice and clean in there. And I'm just going to start setting everything down. I'm going to get it back to 10mm, so there's not too much to do with it after. It doesn't want to be beaten up once it's brazed. I like to put this flux on in a paste. It comes in a powder. I mix it up into a little paste. I find the powder every time. It does work with a powder, but I just find that I do use quite a bit of that in the forge. And I can kind of watch the process of this flux a bit better when it's a paste. So I just put a little bit around all the edges and all the scarves. So it goes in the fire now. The fire's turned down really low. You can have it hotter, but you've got to be a lot quicker with it hotter, and it's kind of melts quite quickly. So the lower the better. And just watching the flux, it'll go through a process of where the flux was a paste and it start turning chalky. As you can see, it's quite looks quite white and sort of chalky now. And then you can start seeing it's just going a bit glassy, so it's not really chalky anymore. And you can just see in edges of it that it's got quite black in places. So that's the next process. It goes to like a watery black, and when it's watery black, you can see it's even getting blacker now. It starts getting ready to be able to braze with it. So it's important though that we need to heat our rod up. So our rod's going in cold, so we need to start getting the rod a bit warm. And what the rod should do is the rod should melt on the shoe and not in the flame. If it melts in the flame, the rod just droops and just falls off. It gets very like it's just bending and flopping over. So we should hopefully in a minute, just starting to get that rod nice and warm, but we should hopefully start seeing there, it just starts melting onto that base material of that shoe. And I go all around the edges. I control where the shoe is in the fire. There's like a hot spot in the fire. So I'm going to do the tip first, and I've pushed that shoe through the fires to try and keep the heel of the shoe nice and cool, or as cool as possible, so it's not in the hot spot of the fire. So I've only got the bit I need to do in the hot spot, and I can control where that shoe is in the flame for where I need it. So I go around all the edges and get all the edges, but it's also important to get the middle of that shoe. So you want to let it run right through the middle of that joint, our chamfered edges, and you feel the rod almost feels like it's just pushing through, like it's just pushed a hole in the shoe when it starts going in that way into where you want it. But I go around and get all the edges and seal them all up, and any little bits that you want to cover up or build up, like where those heels have met at the back, so you can build up the rod, and you just build that material up to what you want it. So we're all done now, and we're out the fire. I don't press it, I just let it cool down. If it looks like it is sort of coming apart, then I might just hold that little stick on it just a little bit to hold it on. But right now I'm just testing the temperature again before I start working it, because when that shoe comes out the fire, it will be too hot to work. So you have to let it just cool down naturally on its own, and then it'll go back into working temperature. I think the aluminium melting point is around 660, and I think the brazing temperature is around 580, so it's very close. Quite often you'll find that you're welding up the frog plate and it's melting off the back of the shoe and you just can't quite see it, but you can always take it out the forge if you're worried about it, and then you can actually go back in without having to reflux it. So now I'm just working that frog plate back down into the correct size. I'm just trying to centralize it a little bit because I know it's off. So but we're going to go through how to centralize that in a minute, right at the end. but it's best to sort of get it a little bit centralised, but I don't want to ruin the shape of the shoe too much. So, gonna have a quick check. Now we've opened it all up, see where we are, see we haven't grown too much. Do we need to grow a bit more? But fairly happy with that. So, scribe across our toe and find where we want to put our fuller in. And then I like to scribe in where I'm going to put my fuller in. I normally come a little bit finer, about 1 millimetre finer than what I normally do with aluminium, because the fuller will try and drag you right into the aluminium. You can end up being a bit coarse before you know it. So we'll go through this with the fuller in, and then in a minute we'll be having to look at how we use that fuller in and that toe to find the centre of our toe, and then from the centre of our toe we can find and centralise our heart bar. With my fuller in, I do it cold. I haven't gone back in the fire. You can do it hot, but I find it just displaces the material too much. If you give your fuller a good run over the polishing wheel, it will run in a bit better. It's not so sticky. So we'll fuller up the other side. Again, it's still all cold. As you fuller, you get sort of like a little peak that sort of racks up on that inside, just on the edges of the fuller in, and some people like to just rasp that off. I normally just give it a flatten back down and then run the fuller back in very lightly, because as you flatten it back down, that peak just puts a little rail on the inside of your fuller in. So I just then run it back through lightly, which we'll see in a minute. There, I just like to, just flatten it all back down. I find it does end up looking better, but you can rasp it off. There's nothing, no right or wrong. And there, where it's just closed up a bit, I just tap through, just run it through very lightly, just to get rid of those edges. Nice pink unicorn tape, and then again stamp them up for the nail holes. It's done cold. Run the fuller back through, it just sort of smooths it out. Takes away all the little racked up edges that you have in the nail holes, and then you have to re-stamp again. It's a bit like that aluminium. It's do one thing, it looks nice, do the next thing, you have to then go back over the first thing. I just try and give it one big tap straight the way through. Again, it's cold, but then I take it over and just rasp off the back. I find that is the best way to get rid of it, because it does get a bit, the nails do get a bit sticky with the little stone traps. But then as you've rasped it off again, you've just created a little step where you've just rasped a bit of material over, so it's just important just to tidy them up just at the end, just run it through lightly. And again with that side, straight over, just rasp off the back of those stone traps. Just tidying up any little bits while you're there if you want. Just finding the centre. I'm just marking that lightly. This is the thing I do get the shoe hot for now, is just to put that clip in. Round side of my hammer, just set it either side and then just start pulling the clip. Exactly the same as you would if you were doing a steel shoe. But obviously it's very soft, so just a bit more gentle. So over we go. Does it all fit? Is it all shaped up? And then once we've done that and we're not hitting it anymore, I just like to find the center of that bar. That's where the heels meet. You can't really alter that too much. So I take that center of where those heels meet with a frog plate, the center of that toe, and then I scribe a line right down through the center of the shoe and the frog plate. This is the last thing you want to do, because every time you hit that shoe, you can see how that frog plate is slightly off. So I'm just checking that toe from the fuller in to the center of the shoe to make sure that line is dead center. Then I take a line from that heel down to that line down the center of the frog plate, and then again from that corner of the heel down to that line I put in the center of the frog plate, and that will show us how much we need to take off of which side to centralize that frog plate with the shoe. Like I say, this is the last thing you want to do, because every time you hit that shoe, or you hit that frog plate, you are going to alter that. It is going to move slightly. So if you centralize the shoe and then you go and move it or shape it or hit it, then you want to then check it again. So it goes right down the center of that frog plate down to the center of the toe, and then we should have a nice centralized heart bar. And there we have it, the aluminium heart bar. Well, thanks for watching, guys, and hopefully see you next time.